The morning sun rose gently over the rolling green hills of a small African village, where life was simple but filled with hope. Chickens wandered between mud houses, children laughed as they chased one another along dusty paths, and women carried baskets of fresh vegetables toward the busy market. Among those children were two inseparable friends, David and Amara. From the time they could walk, they had shared every moment together. They studied under the same old mango tree, fetched water from the village well, and dreamed about building a better future beyond the borders of their humble home. David came from one of the poorest families in the village. His father had passed away when he was young, leaving his mother to raise him alone by selling handmade baskets in the local market. Every morning before school, David helped his mother carry heavy bundles, never complaining despite the exhausting work. Although life was difficult, he believed poverty was only temporary. He often told Amara, "One day I'll become successful, build the biggest house in this village, and make sure you never worry about money again." Amara would smile warmly and squeeze his hand. "I don't need riches," she would reply. "As long as we're together, I'll always be happy." Those words became David's greatest motivation. Whenever he felt tired or discouraged, he remembered her promise and worked even harder. The villagers admired their loyalty, often saying they were destined to marry. Even the village elder smiled whenever he saw them walking together, believing their love was a rare gift that could survive any hardship. As they grew older, their bond deepened. David learned carpentry after school to earn extra money, while Amara helped her mother sell fruit at the market. Every small coin David earned went into a hidden wooden box beneath his bed. He wasn't spending it on himself. He was saving it for the future he dreamed of sharing with Amara. One evening, they climbed the highest hill overlooking the village. The sunset painted the sky with brilliant shades of orange and gold as they watched birds fly toward the distant mountains. David pulled a small handmade necklace from his pocket, carved from polished wood with great care. "It's not expensive," he said shyly, placing it around Amara's neck. "But one day, I'll replace it with a diamond." Amara's eyes filled with tears as she hugged him tightly. "I don't want diamonds," she whispered. "This necklace means more to me than any jewel." Neither of them realized that fate was quietly preparing a test that would challenge every promise they had ever made. Beyond the peaceful village roads, someone was about to arrive, someone with immense wealth, endless luxury, and the power to turn love into betrayal. Cliffhanger. The next morning, a convoy of luxury vehicles rolled into the village, and Amara couldn't stop staring at the man who stepped out of the first black SUV. The peaceful rhythm of the village was shattered by the roar of powerful engines. One after another, 3 gleaming black luxury SUVs rolled through the dusty road, leaving clouds of red earth behind them. Children ran excitedly after the vehicles, while adults stopped working to watch the unexpected visitors. No one had ever seen cars so expensive in their village. Every window reflected the bright African sun, making the convoy look almost unreal. When the lead SUV stopped in the center of the village, a tall, well-dressed man stepped out. His name was Kelvin Mensah, a wealthy businessman from the city. He wore an elegant tailored suit, polished Italian shoes, a luxury watch worth more than most villagers would earn in a lifetime, and dark sunglasses that hid his eyes. His confident smile and expensive appearance immediately captured everyone's attention. The village chief welcomed Kelvin warmly after learning he planned to invest in farmland nearby. News spread quickly that he owned hotels, mining companies, and construction businesses across several African countries. To the villagers, he represented a life they had only imagined through television and social media. Among the curious crowd stood Amara. She had never seen such wealth up close. As Kelvin shook hands with the villagers, his eyes briefly met hers. He smiled politely before complimenting her beauty. "You have a smile brighter than the African sunrise," Kelvin said confidently. Amara blushed. No one had ever spoken to her that way. David, standing beside her, noticed the excitement in her eyes. Although she laughed off the compliment, something inside her had already begun to change. Over the following weeks, Kelvin visited the village regularly. Each visit was grander than the last. He donated money to repair the local school, provided food for struggling families, and distributed gifts to children. The villagers praised his generosity, calling him a blessing from God. Amara became one of the volunteers helping organize his community projects. She spent more time around Kelvin, listening to stories about skyscrapers, luxury vacations, five-star hotels, and glamorous city life. Every conversation made her village seem smaller and her dreams bigger. Meanwhile, David continued working tirelessly. He built furniture late into the night, hoping to earn enough money to buy a small piece of land where he and Amara could someday build their home. He proudly showed her sketches of the little house he planned to construct with his own hands. But instead of smiling as she once did, Amara looked distracted. "David," she said quietly one evening, "have you ever wondered if we're dreaming too small?" David looked at her in confusion. "What do you mean?" She hesitated before answering. "Maybe life is more to offer than this village." Those words pierced David's heart. For the first time, he felt the distance growing between them, not because of miles, but because of ambition. He still believed love was enough. Amara was beginning to believe that love without wealth was simply another form of poverty. As the sun set behind the hills, Kelvin watched the couple from a distance with a confident smile. He wasn't interested in the village. He wanted Amara. Cliffhanger. The next day, Kelvin invited Amara to the city in his private helicopter, and she accepted without telling David. The morning David discovered the truth was the morning his world began to fall apart. He arrived at Amara's house carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers and a neatly wrapped wooden box. Inside was a simple silver ring he had spent 2 years saving to buy. It wasn't expensive, but every coin represented hours of hard work, sleepless nights, and sacrifices he had made for the woman he loved. He imagined surprising her and asking her family for permission to marry her. As he approached the house, he heard laughter. It wasn't the cheerful laughter they used to share. It was louder, richer, surrounded by people dressed in elegant clothes. Parked outside were 2 luxury SUVs, their polished surfaces reflecting the bright African sun. Curious villagers gathered around, whispering excitedly. David stopped in his tracks when he saw Amara stepping out of the house. She wore a stunning designer dress, expensive jewelry sparkled around her neck, and her hair had been professionally styled. Standing beside her was Kelvin, smiling confidently as he gently held her hand. For a brief moment, David believed there had been a misunderstanding. He walked toward her, forcing a smile. "Amara," he said softly, "I came to show you something." She looked at the flowers and the small box in his hands before exchanging a glance with Kelvin. Instead of the warm smile David expected, she sighed impatiently. "You shouldn't have come." The words struck him like a hammer. I wanted to ask your parents for your hand in marriage." The crowd fell silent. Amara crossed her arms. "Marriage?" she repeated with a faint laugh. "David, you're still dreaming?" David slowly opened the wooden box and revealed the silver ring. "It isn't much," he admitted, "but I promise I'll give you a better life. Just give me time." Several villagers watched with sympathy, hoping Amara would accept. Instead, she burst into laughter. "Time," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I've waited long enough." She pointed toward Kelvin's luxury vehicles. "Look around you, David. This is the life I deserve, not a tiny mud house and empty promises." David's hands trembled. "I've worked every day for us." "And what has all that work given you?" She replied coldly. "You're still poor." The crowd gasped. Kelvin stepped forward with a confident smile and slipped a large diamond ring onto Amara's finger. "I've asked Amara to marry me," he announced. She accepted. Applause erupted from some of the villagers, while others looked away, unable to watch David's heartbreak. David stared at the diamond ring, then at the simple silver ring still resting in his own hand. Without saying another word, Amara removed the wooden necklace David had carved for her years ago. She dropped it onto the dusty ground between them. "I don't need memories anymore," she said. "I need a future." David slowly bent down, picked up the necklace, and brushed the dust away with shaking hands. Tears filled his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. He looked directly at Amara for the final time. "I hope," he said quietly, "that one day you never have to learn the difference between wealth and worth." He turned and walked away as the villagers watched in silence. Behind him, laughter and celebration filled the air. No one noticed that this wasn't the end of David's story. It was the beginning of a journey that would change every life in the village forever. Cliffhanger. Before sunrise the next morning, David disappeared without saying goodbye. 10 years later, the entire country would know his name. Before the first rays of sunlight touched the village, David quietly packed everything he owned into a worn-out canvas backpack. Inside were only 2 changes of clothes, a notebook filled with business ideas, a small family photograph, and the wooden necklace Amara had thrown onto the ground the day before. He looked around the tiny house where he had grown up. His mother was already awake, silently watching him from the doorway. She had seen the pain in his eyes when he returned home after the public humiliation, and she knew nothing she could say would erase the heartbreak. She walked over and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "My son," she whispered, "sometimes God closes one door because he is preparing a greater one. Don't let bitterness become your companion." David nodded, struggling to hold back tears. "I don't hate her, Mother," he said softly, "but I can't stay here anymore. Every road, every tree, every corner of this village reminds me of a dream that no longer exists." His mother embraced him tightly and slipped a small cloth pouch into his hand. Inside were a few crumpled banknotes, the family's entire savings. "I wanted to save this for your wedding," she said with a trembling smile. "Now use it to build your future." David tried to refuse, but she insisted. With tears in his eyes, he kissed her forehead, picked up his backpack, and walked toward the village road. The air was cool, and birds had just begun singing. As he passed the old mango tree where he and Amara had once studied together, he paused for a moment. He gently touched the rough bark, remembering the promises they had carved into its trunk years earlier. Their initials were still there, faded but visible. He smiled sadly, then continued walking without looking back. His journey was far more difficult than he had imagined. He reached the nearest city, with almost no money left. For weeks he slept on park benches, abandoned construction sites, and sometimes outside small shops that allowed him to rest under their awnings. During the day he accepted any job he could find. He carried heavy cement bags on construction sites, washed dishes in roadside restaurants, cleaned warehouses, and unloaded trucks late into the night. Many employers mocked his worn clothes and paid him less than they had promised, but David never argued. Every small payment was another step toward the future he refused to abandon. Whenever exhaustion tempted him to quit, he opened his notebook and wrote down new business ideas. He read old newspapers that people had thrown away, borrowed books from a public library, and taught himself about entrepreneurship, farming, technology, and finance. While others spent evenings complaining about life, David spent every free minute learning. He came to believe that knowledge was the one thing poverty could never steal. Years passed, and the young man who had left the village broken-hearted slowly transformed into someone stronger. The pain of betrayal no longer controlled him. Instead, it fueled his determination. He stopped dreaming about proving Amara wrong and started dreaming about proving himself right. One evening, after finishing another exhausting shift, David looked up at the city's skyline glowing beneath the stars. He whispered to himself, "One day, I won't return to my village seeking revenge. I'll return as living proof that no one should ever be judged by what they have today." At that very moment, hundreds of miles away, Amara celebrated another luxurious party with Kelvin, convinced she had made the greatest decision of her life. She had no idea that the poor carpenter she had laughed at was about to meet a mentor whose guidance would change his destiny forever. Cliffhanger. Just when David had almost lost hope, an elderly billionaire noticed something extraordinary about the young laborer and offered him an opportunity that would transform his life forever. 3 years passed after David left his village. Every sunrise found him working before dawn, and every sunset ended with him studying under the dim lights of a public library. He had become known as one of the hardest-working young men in the city. Although he still lived in a tiny rented room with cracked walls and a leaking roof, his determination had never faded. He believed that every difficult day was preparing him for something greater. One hot afternoon, David was working at a large construction site on the outskirts of the city. The workers had been asked to unload hundreds of heavy cement bags from delivery trucks before evening. Most of the laborers complained about the heat and worked slowly, but David continued, without stopping. His shirt was soaked with sweat, his hands were covered with dust, and his shoulders ached from carrying heavy loads. Yet he never complained. That same afternoon, an elderly businessman named Mr. Samuel Okoro arrived to inspect the construction of a new business complex. Samuel was one of Africa's most respected entrepreneurs. Having built a multinational engineering company from nothing, he believed that a person's character mattered more than their appearance. As he walked around the site, he noticed something unusual. While many workers rested whenever the supervisor looked away, one young man continued helping others finish their work before thinking about himself. Curious, Samuel watched David from a distance for nearly an hour. When the workday ended, Samuel approached him. "You've been working all day," he said. "Why didn't you stop to rest like everyone else?" David smiled politely. "If I stop before finishing my responsibility, I'll only have to carry the same burden tomorrow." The answer impressed Samuel. Instead of leaving, the businessman invited David to share a simple meal at a nearby restaurant. During dinner, Samuel asked about his life. David spoke honestly about growing up in a poor village, losing the woman he loved, and leaving home with almost nothing. But he never blamed anyone. Instead, he explained that every painful experience had taught him resilience. Samuel leaned back in his chair and smiled. "Most people ask life to become easier," he said. "Very few ask themselves how they can become stronger." Before leaving, Samuel handed David a business card. "My company is opening a trainee program," he explained. "The salary isn't impressive, but you'll learn how successful businesses are built. Report to my office Monday morning." David stared at the card in disbelief. It was the opportunity he had prayed for during countless sleepless nights. As he walked back to his small apartment, he looked up at the stars with tears in his eyes. For the first time since leaving the village, he felt that destiny had finally opened a door. He had no idea that this single meeting would transform him from a struggling laborer into one of the most influential businessmen on the continent. Cliffhanger. Within 5 years, David would build an empire worth billions, but at that same moment, Amara's luxurious marriage was beginning to crack behind closed doors. 5 years after David began working under Samuel Okoro's guidance, his life had changed beyond recognition. He had become one of the fastest-rising entrepreneurs in Africa, leading innovative agricultural and technology projects that transformed struggling rural communities. Newspapers praised his vision. Business magazines featured him on their covers, and investors competed for the chance to partner with his growing company. Yet despite his incredible success, David rarely spoke about his past. The pain of betrayal had become a quiet chapter of his life, not the story that defined him. Hundreds of miles away, Amara appeared to be living the dream she had once chosen over love. Her social media pages were filled with glamorous photographs, luxury vacations on tropical islands, designer handbags, sparkling jewelry, elegant evening gowns, and expensive restaurants overlooking city skylines. Friends from the village admired her lifestyle, believing she had married the perfect man. Every new post attracted thousands of likes and comments from people who envied her seemingly perfect life. But behind the walls of Kelvin's enormous mansion, reality was very different. The warm, charming businessman who had once showered her with compliments slowly disappeared after their wedding. In his place stood a cold, controlling husband obsessed with power, reputation, and wealth. Every decision Amara made required his approval. He decided what she wore, where she went, who she spoke to, and even when she could visit her own parents. If she questioned him, he responded with silence or harsh criticism. "You represent my image," Kelvin often reminded her. "A billionaire's wife doesn't make her own decisions." At first, Amara convinced herself that this was simply the price of marrying a powerful man. She believed things would improve with time. Instead, they became worse. Kelvin spent more nights traveling for business meetings than he did at home. Rumors of secret affairs reached Amara through newspapers and gossip columns, but whenever she confronted him, he laughed dismissively. "You enjoy this house, these cars, and this lifestyle because of me," he said coldly. "Don't forget that." One evening, while cleaning a storage room, Amara discovered an old wooden box containing the necklace David had carved for her years ago. She had secretly kept it instead of throwing it away forever. Holding the smooth wooden pendant in her trembling hands, memories flooded back. The mango tree, the sunsets over the village, David's quiet promises, and the genuine happiness they had shared without money. For the first time in years, tears rolled down her face. She walked to the balcony overlooking the city lights and whispered into the night, "Was I chasing happiness, or just expensive distractions?" The mansion around her was filled with priceless furniture, priceless artwork, and priceless luxury. Yet she had never felt so poor. At that very moment, television screens across the country interrupted their regular programming with breaking business news. Young entrepreneur David Ndlovu has signed the largest agricultural investment deal in the nation's history, creating thousands of new jobs across rural Africa. Amara looked up in shock. The camera zoomed in on the confident businessman standing beside world leaders. He wore an elegant suit, spoke with quiet confidence, and carried himself with the dignity of a man who had earned every success through hard work. She could barely breathe. The poor carpenter she had laughed at in front of the entire village had become one of the most admired businessmen on the continent. For the first time since leaving him, regret entered her heart, not because he was now wealthy, but because she realized she had abandoned the only person who had ever loved her without expecting anything in return. Cliffhanger. As Amara stared at David's face on the television, Kelvin walked into the room holding a confidential document that would destroy both their lives forever. The atmosphere inside Kelvin's luxurious mansion changed overnight. The laughter that had once echoed through its marble halls disappeared, replaced by tense whispers, urgent phone calls, and the constant ringing of cell phones. Expensive suits hung untouched in the wardrobe, half-finished meals sat cold on the dining table, and Kelvin barely slept. Something was terribly wrong, but he refused to explain it to Amara. One morning, as Amara walked downstairs, she found Kelvin sitting alone in his private office. His laptop was open, dozens of financial reports covered the desk, and empty coffee cups surrounded him. His usually confident face looked pale and exhausted. "Kelvin," she asked gently, "what's happening?" He quickly closed the laptop. "Nothing you need to worry about," but Amara could see the fear in his eyes. Over the following weeks, strange events began unfolding one after another. Several luxury vehicles disappeared from the mansion's garage. Kelvin claimed they had been sold to make room for newer models, but the truth was very different. Bank loans had become overdue, and creditors had started seizing his assets. Soon afterward, the family helicopter was quietly repossessed. Then one of his vacation homes was put up for sale. The servants who had worked in the mansion for years suddenly resigned because they had not received their salaries for months. One by one, trusted employees left the company, and the once busy offices became almost empty. Amara tried to ask questions, but Kelvin grew increasingly aggressive. "Stop interfering in my business," he shouted one evening. "You wouldn't understand." Late one night, unable to sleep, Amara accidentally overheard Kelvin arguing on the phone. "I need more time," he yelled. "If the investigation continues, everything will be exposed." Her heart raced. Investigation? The next morning, curiosity overcame fear. While Kelvin attended an emergency board meeting, Amara entered his office and carefully searched through the files scattered across his desk. What she discovered left her frozen. There were government investigation notices, frozen bank account statements, tax fraud reports, and confidential letters accusing Kelvin's company of money laundering, illegal mining operations, and bribery. Several major investors had withdrawn their support, and international banks had suspended billions of dollars in financing. The empire Kelvin had proudly built wasn't collapsing because of bad luck. It had been built on corruption. As she stood there in shock, the television suddenly switched to a breaking news report. Authorities have launched one of the largest financial crime investigations in the country's history. Several executives connected to Kelvin Holdings are expected to face criminal charges. Reporters surrounded Kelvin outside his corporate headquarters, firing difficult questions. Did your company hide illegal profits? Are the corruption allegations true? Did you deceive your investors? For the first time, the powerful businessman who had once looked untouchable remained completely silent. Amara slowly sat down, realizing the luxurious life she had sacrificed everything for was nothing more than an illusion. The designer clothes, the expensive jewelry, the luxury vacations, they had all been purchased with money that might never have belonged to Kelvin in the first place. That evening, dozens of television channels showed another headline. David Ndlovu's company announces a record-breaking investment to help struggling African farmers. While Kelvin's empire crumbled under the weight of greed, David's business continued to grow because it had been built on honesty, innovation, and hard work. Looking at the television, Amara whispered through tears, "I left a man with nothing and walked away from the richest heart I would ever know." She had no idea that this was only the beginning of her suffering, because within 24 hours, the police would arrive at the mansion with an arrest warrant bearing Kelvin's name. Cliffhanger. As flashing police lights illuminated the mansion gates, Amara watched officers step out of their vehicles. Her perfect life was about to collapse in front of the entire nation. The morning after Kelvin's financial scandal dominated every television channel, the nation awoke to another headline, one that shifted everyone's attention. Africa's youngest self-made billionaire returns home to launch a historic development project. The name beneath the headline made people stop scrolling. David Ndlovu, the same poor village boy who had disappeared years earlier, was now one of the continent's most respected entrepreneurs. His company had expanded into agriculture, renewable energy, technology, and education, employing more than 50,000 people across Africa. Unlike many wealthy businessmen, David had earned a reputation for honesty and compassion. He funded scholarships for underprivileged students, built hospitals in remote communities, and invested in villages that had long been forgotten by the government. Television stations broadcast his arrival live. A sleek private jet landed at the international airport as hundreds of journalists, business leaders, government officials, and young entrepreneurs gathered to welcome him. When the aircraft door opened, David stepped onto the red carpet wearing a perfectly tailored navy blue suit. His confident posture, calm smile, and humble demeanor impressed everyone watching. Camera flashes lit up the runway. One reporter rushed forward. "Mr. Ndlovu, you've become one of Africa's most influential business leaders. What's the secret behind your incredible success?" David smiled before answering. "I never chased revenge. I chased purpose. Success built on anger doesn't last. Success built on service changes lives." His words spread across social media within minutes, inspiring millions. Meanwhile, inside the nearly empty mansion, Amara watched the live broadcast in complete silence. The luxurious house that once hosted glamorous parties now felt cold and lifeless. Several paintings had already been removed by the bank, expensive furniture was marked for auction, and many rooms stood empty. As David continued speaking on television, Amara couldn't stop staring at his face. He looked different, not just because of his elegant appearance, but because of the peace in his eyes. Years ago, she had seen pain and heartbreak there. Now she saw confidence, wisdom, and quiet strength. She remembered the dusty village road, where she had laughed at him in front of everyone. She remembered dropping the handmade wooden necklace into the dirt. She remembered calling him a poor dreamer. Every memory now felt like a knife piercing her heart. Just then, another news reporter announced something unexpected. Mr. Ndlovu's first project after returning home will be the complete redevelopment of his hometown. The plan includes a modern hospital, a technical university, affordable housing, clean water systems, and thousands of new jobs for local residents. The announcement shocked the entire village. People who had once pitied David could hardly believe what they were hearing. The same villagers who had watched him leave with a worn-out backpack now prepared banners to welcome him home as a hero. Even the village chief, who had remained silent during David's humiliation years earlier, admitted publicly, We failed to recognize greatness because we judged a young man by his poverty instead of his character. News of David's return spread rapidly until it reached Kelvin, who was sitting alone in his lawyer's office, surrounded by legal documents and unpaid debts. The lawyer looked at him seriously. "There's one person who may be able to save your company." Kelvin frowned. "Who?" The lawyer placed a business magazine on the table. On the cover was David Ndlovu. His investment group is the only organization financially strong enough to buy your collapsing company. Kelvin stared at the magazine in disbelief. The poor carpenter he had once considered worthless now held the power to decide whether his business empire lived or died. At that very moment, David's motorcade entered the village where everything had begun. Crowds lined the streets, cheering his name as children waved flags and elders smiled proudly. David looked through the window at the familiar roads, the old mango tree, and the houses he had never forgotten. He had returned, not as a broken young man seeking revenge, but as a billionaire carrying the power to change countless lives. Yet fate had one final surprise waiting for him. Standing quietly at the edge of the cheering crowd was Amara, clutching the old wooden necklace against her chest. Tears streamed down her face as their eyes met for the first time in 10 years. Cliffhanger. As David stepped out of his car, Amara slowly walked toward him. Before she could say a single word, Kelvin arrived and made a desperate offer that would leave the entire village speechless. The celebration in the village came to a sudden halt as another convoy of black vehicles sped down the dusty road. The sound of screeching tires echoed through the square, and everyone turned to see who had arrived. The doors opened, and Kelvin stepped out, no longer looking like the confident billionaire who had once dominated every room he entered. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his eyes were red from sleepless nights, and the stress on his face made him appear years older. The villagers whispered among themselves, "Isn't that Amara's husband? What is he doing here? He looks like he's lost everything." Kelvin ignored the crowd and walked directly toward David. Security guards immediately moved forward, but David calmly raised his hand, signaling them to step aside. "It's all right," David said. "Let's hear what he has to say." Kelvin stopped a few feet away, his pride battling with desperation. For a long moment, neither man spoke. The silence was so deep that even the cheering crowd became quiet. Finally, Kelvin broke it. "David, I need your help." The words stunned everyone. Years ago, Kelvin had looked down on David as nothing more than a poor village carpenter. Now he stood before him, asking for mercy. David remained calm. "What kind of help?" Kelvin took a deep breath. "My companies are collapsing. The government has frozen several accounts. Investors have abandoned me. Banks are demanding immediate repayment, and thousands of employees will lose their jobs if my businesses fail." He reached into a leather briefcase and carefully removed a thick stack of legal documents. "I want you to buy my company." Gasps spread through the crowd. Even Amara couldn't believe what she was hearing. The man she had chosen because of his wealth was now begging the man she had abandoned for financial rescue. David accepted the documents without showing any emotion. He flipped through the pages carefully, studying balance sheets, debt reports, court notices, and financial statements. The numbers were shocking. Kelvin Holdings owed billions. Several subsidiaries were already under criminal investigation, while multiple executives had resigned to avoid prosecution. Hidden liabilities stretched across numerous countries. David slowly closed the file. "This isn't a business," he said quietly. "It's a sinking ship." Kelvin's shoulders dropped. "I know." For the first time in years, the powerful businessman looked completely defeated. "I made terrible decisions. I trusted the wrong people. I became obsessed with growing faster than everyone else. Now thousands of innocent workers may lose their jobs because of my mistakes." David looked into Kelvin's eyes. He saw fear. Not the fear of losing luxury cars or mansions, but the fear of watching everything he had built disappear forever. The villagers expected David to laugh. They expected him to humiliate Kelvin the same way Kelvin and Amara had once humiliated him. Instead, David surprised everyone. "I'll consider your proposal." The crowd fell silent. Kelvin looked up in disbelief. "You're willing to help me?" David answered calmly, I'm willing to help the innocent employees who depend on those companies, not the man who destroyed them. Those words struck Kelvin harder than any insult ever could. David handed the documents to his legal advisor. My team will investigate every account. If corruption is involved, justice must come first. If honest workers can be protected, we'll find a solution. Kelvin nodded silently. For the first time in his life, he understood that true power wasn't measured by wealth or influence. It was measured by integrity. As David turned to greet the villagers, Amara stood frozen only a few steps away, clutching the old wooden necklace in trembling hands. Tears streamed down her face as she realized the man she had once called worthless had become greater than she had ever imagined. She slowly walked toward him. David. Her voice trembled. There is something I should have said 10 years ago. David turned to face her. The crowd watched in complete silence, knowing this conversation would change both of their lives forever. Cliffhanger. Before Amara could apologize, a young boy suddenly ran into the village square shouting, Mr. David, your mother has collapsed. David's face instantly changed as he sprinted toward his childhood home. David's heart pounded as he raced through the narrow village paths. The celebration behind him disappeared into the distance, replaced by the sound of his hurried footsteps. Villagers stepped aside, watching silently as Africa's newest billionaire ran not toward fame or fortune, but toward the small mud house where he had been raised. When he reached the doorway, he froze. His mother lay on a simple wooden bed, breathing weakly. A village nurse was checking her pulse, while several elderly neighbors stood quietly in the corner, their faces filled with concern. The room looked exactly as David had remembered it years earlier. The old wooden table, the faded family photographs, and the handmade baskets his mother had woven were still there. Despite all his wealth, nothing had changed inside the home that had shaped his childhood. David rushed to her side and gently held her hand. Mother, I'm here. She slowly opened her eyes. A tired smile appeared on her face. I knew you would come. Tears rolled down David's cheeks. During the years he had spent building his business empire, he had spoken to his mother almost every day and visited whenever possible. He had begged her countless times to move into one of his luxurious homes in the city, but she always refused. This village is my home, she would say. I want to stay where your father and I built our life together. The village doctor quietly approached David. She isn't in immediate danger, he explained. Her blood pressure dropped because of exhaustion and stress. She needs rest, proper treatment, and someone close to her. David nodded with relief. Just then, footsteps echoed outside the house. Amara stood at the doorway. She hesitated, unsure if she should enter. David's mother noticed her immediately. Come in, my child. Amara slowly walked inside, unable to lift her eyes from the floor. Shame weighed heavily on her heart. The last time she had entered this house was years ago, when she had promised David they would spend the rest of their lives together. David remained silent. He neither welcomed nor rejected her. His mother gently reached out her trembling hand. Amara knelt beside the bed and held it carefully. My son has always had a kind heart, the elderly woman whispered. Even after everything that happened, he never spoke badly about you. Amara broke down in tears. I don't deserve your kindness, she cried. I destroyed his heart. I abandoned him when he needed me most. Every day since then, I've regretted the choice I made. The room fell silent. David looked out the window toward the old mango tree where their childhood memories still lived. His mother smiled weakly. People make mistakes because they chase what shines instead of what lasts. She looked from David to Amara. I have only one wish before I leave this world. David leaned closer. Anything, mother. I don't want revenge to live in your heart. David lowered his head. I don't hate anyone anymore. She nodded with satisfaction. Good. Because hatred keeps people in prison long after pain has ended. At that moment, David's phone rang. His chief legal officer sounded urgent. Sir, we've completed our investigation into Kelvin Holdings. David's expression became serious. What did you find? The lawyer paused before answering. The corruption is worse than we imagined, but we've also uncovered something that changes everything. David frowned. What is it? The evidence suggests Kelvin wasn't the mastermind. Someone much more powerful has been using his company as a front for an international criminal network. David slowly stood. Outside, dark clouds gathered over the village as thunder rumbled in the distance. This was no longer just a story about heartbreak, betrayal, or lost love. It had become a battle against dangerous people who would do anything to keep their secrets hidden. Cliffhanger. As David ended the call, several black SUVs appeared at the entrance of the village. Armed men stepped out, and their leader delivered a chilling message. Mr. Ndlovu, hand over the evidence, or your mother dies tonight. The peaceful village was thrown into panic as the black SUVs stopped outside David's childhood home. Men dressed in dark suits stepped out, their expressions cold and emotionless. Although they carried no visible weapons, everyone could sense they were dangerous. Villagers hurried their children indoors, while elders watched nervously from a distance. David walked outside before anyone else could react. He closed the wooden door behind him, making sure his mother remained safe inside the house. The leader of the group, a tall man with a scar across his left cheek, stepped forward. Mr. David Ndlovu, he said calmly. We need to talk. David folded his arms. I'm listening. The man smiled. You've been investigating Kelvin Holdings. Yes. Then stop. David remained silent. The stranger took another step closer. There are powerful people behind that company. People who don't appear on television, people whose names never appear in newspapers. David looked him directly in the eyes. If they've committed crimes, they'll answer for them. The man's smile disappeared. You still don't understand. He opened a briefcase and placed several confidential files on the hood of a vehicle. Read them. David carefully opened the first file. His expression changed immediately. The documents revealed years of illegal financial transactions involving politicians, international investors, fake charities, and offshore companies. Billions of dollars had been secretly moved across different countries. Kelvin's company had indeed been involved, but only as one piece of a much larger criminal organization. David continued reading. Another file contained internal emails proving that Kelvin had repeatedly questioned suspicious transactions. Whenever he refused to approve them, anonymous threats were sent to his family. Eventually, he had signed the documents out of fear. David slowly looked up. So, Kelvin wasn't controlling the operation. The stranger shook his head. He was being controlled. Just then, another luxury car entered the village. Kelvin stepped out, escorted by 2 government investigators. He looked exhausted. I told them everything, Kelvin admitted. David stared at him. Why now? Kelvin lowered his head. Because I finally realized that protecting criminals destroyed everything I loved. He turned toward Amara, who had quietly walked outside. I'm sorry. His voice cracked with emotion. I wanted to give you the perfect life, but instead, I trapped you inside my lies. Amara wiped away tears. For the first time since their marriage, she saw genuine regret in Kelvin's eyes. Before anyone could speak again, one of the investigators approached David. Mr. Ndlovu, we need your help. David frowned. What kind of help? The financial records you've uncovered are the missing evidence in one of Africa's largest corruption investigations. The investigator paused before continuing. If we expose this network, thousands of innocent workers will keep their jobs, but many powerful people will lose everything. David looked around the village. He remembered leaving this place with nothing except hope. Now he stood here holding evidence capable of shaking an entire nation. The scar-faced stranger suddenly laughed. You have 2 choices. He pointed toward David's childhood home. Protect your family. Then he pointed toward the investigation files. Or expose the truth. The village fell completely silent. Every eye turned toward David. Would he protect the people he loved? Or risk everything to bring justice to millions? David slowly closed the file and looked at the frightened villagers surrounding him. His voice was calm but unwavering. I grew up believing that fear gives evil people their power. He handed the evidence to the investigators. Today, that power ends. The scar-faced man's smile vanished. He quietly climbed back into his vehicle. As the convoy drove away, he made a phone call. The billionaire refused. A voice on the other end replied coldly. Then begin phase 2. David watched the vehicles disappear down the dusty road, unaware that a deadly plan had already been set in motion. Cliffhanger. That night, as David prepared to leave the village, a massive explosion lit up the horizon. One of his company's factories was on fire, and someone had left a message written in flames. You're next. The night sky turned bright orange as flames swallowed one of David Ndlova's largest agricultural processing factories on the outskirts of the city. Thick black smoke rose high into the air, visible for miles. Fire engines raced toward the scene, their sirens echoing through the darkness, while hundreds of terrified workers gathered outside the burning building. David's phone rang just as he was leaving the village. "Sir," his operations manager shouted. "The East River processing plant is on fire. We've evacuated the employees, but the entire facility is collapsing." Without hesitation, David jumped into his SUV. "Make sure everyone is accounted for," he ordered. "No one goes back inside. Lives come first." His convoy sped toward the city. Along the way, television stations interrupted their regular programming with breaking news. One of billionaire David Ndlova's factories has suffered a devastating explosion. Authorities suspect sabotage. Social media exploded with speculation. Some claimed it was an accident. Others believed it was revenge for David's cooperation with investigators. Within an hour, the story became the most discussed topic across the country. When David arrived, firefighters were battling walls of fire that reached into the night sky. Steel beams twisted from the intense heat, windows shattered, and the roof collapsed with a thunderous crash. The factory manager rushed toward him. "Sir, we followed the emergency evacuation plan. Every worker made it out alive." David closed his eyes in relief. Thank God. As he surveyed the destruction, an investigator approached holding a small metal box recovered near the explosion's origin. "It wasn't an accident," she said. She opened the box. Inside was a timer, damaged electronic components, and a folded piece of paper. David unfolded the note. Only 7 words were written in bold black ink. "This is only the beginning. Stay silent." The police immediately sealed off the area. Forensic experts began collecting evidence, while reporters surrounded the entrance, hoping for a statement. Microphones stretched toward David. "Mr. Ndlova, are you afraid? Will you withdraw from the corruption investigation? Do you know who's behind this attack?" David looked at the cameras. His clothes smelled of smoke, ash covered his shoes, and the burning factory reflected in his eyes. He spoke calmly. "I've lost buildings before." The reporters fell silent. "I've lost money before." He paused. "I've even lost the person I loved most." The crowd listened carefully. "But every loss taught me something important." He pointed toward the workers standing safely behind the emergency barriers. "A factory can be rebuilt." He looked at the firefighters risking their lives. "Machines can be replaced." Then he smiled. "But integrity cannot be bought, and courage cannot be burned." His speech spread across television and social media within minutes. Millions praised his refusal to surrender. Even people who had never heard of David before now admired his character. Watching from a secret location, the leader of the criminal network slammed his fist onto a table. He should have been terrified. One of his associates replied nervously. Instead, people admire him even more. The leader's face hardened. "Then we stop attacking his business." He slowly unfolded a photograph of David standing beside his mother, with Amara in the background. "If we can't destroy his empire," he smiled coldly, "we'll destroy his heart." At that same moment, David's chief of security received an urgent message on his encrypted phone. "Sir, we've intercepted intelligence." David looked up. "What is it?" The security chief's face turned pale. "They're no longer targeting your company." A heavy silence followed. "They're coming for your family." David's expression changed instantly. Without another word, he turned toward his convoy. The battle had become deeply personal. Cliffhanger. As David's vehicles raced back toward the village, armed men were already surrounding his mother's house, and Amara was trapped inside with her. The village, once filled with celebration, had fallen into complete silence. The only sounds were the distant rumble of thunder and the wind rustling through the old mango tree where David and Amara had spent their childhood. Inside David's mother's small house, the lights suddenly went out. Darkness filled every room. Amara immediately stood up. "Mother Grace, stay behind me." David's mother looked toward the window and noticed several flashlights moving outside. "They're here," she whispered. A loud knock echoed through the house. Then another, and another. The wooden door shook violently as someone tried to force it open. Outside, nearly a dozen masked men surrounded the house. They carried radios and wore black tactical clothing. Their leader gave a cold command. "No unnecessary violence. We only need the evidence and David." One of the men replied nervously. "What if the women resist?" The leader's answer sent chills through everyone listening. "Leave no witnesses." Inside, Amara's hands began trembling. Years earlier, she had dreamed of luxury, believing money could solve every problem. Now she found herself standing inside the tiny mud house she had once looked down upon, ready to risk her life to protect the very family she had abandoned. She quietly helped David's mother toward a hidden storage room beneath the floor. "Stay here," Amara whispered. "What about you?" the older woman asked. Amara smiled through tears. "For years, I ran away from the people who truly loved me." She gently closed the hidden door. "I'm not running anymore." Just then, the front door burst open. Masked men rushed inside. The leader shouted, "Search every room." Furniture crashed to the floor as they searched the house. One of them spotted Amara standing alone in the middle of the room. "Where's David?" She remained silent. Another man grabbed her arm. "Answer." She looked directly into his eyes. "I don't know." The man raised his hand to strike her. Before he could move, a powerful voice echoed from outside. "Let her go." Every head turned. David stood in the doorway. Behind him were dozens of police officers, special investigators, and members of his private security team. Blue and red emergency lights illuminated the entire village. The masked men realized they had walked into a trap. Their leader immediately grabbed Amara and pressed a knife against her neck. "No one moves." The officers aimed their weapons but couldn't fire. David slowly stepped forward. "You want me?" The leader smiled. "Exactly." David raised both hands. "I'll come with you." Amara's eyes widened. "No." David ignored her. "Release her, and I'll go willingly." The leader laughed. "For a billionaire, you're surprisingly predictable." He pushed Amara away and ordered 2 men to seize David. But at that exact moment, hidden police snipers disabled the kidnappers by shooting the weapons from their hands. Officers stormed the house from every direction. Within seconds, the village erupted into chaos. Some criminals surrendered immediately. Others attempted to escape through the back of the house, only to be arrested by waiting officers. The leader managed to flee into the darkness. As silence returned, Amara ran toward David. Without thinking, she hugged him tightly. "I'm so sorry," she cried. "I've spent 10 years wishing I could undo one terrible decision." David gently stepped back. "I'm grateful you're safe." His voice remained calm, but some wounds take longer to heal than others. Before anyone could say another word, the chief investigator approached David holding a satellite phone. "We've captured several suspects." He paused. But the man who controls the entire organization escaped. David frowned. "Do we know where he's going?" The investigator nodded. "Yes." He handed David a confidential file. "He's heading to the place where this story began." David looked at the file. His eyes widened. "The old diamond mine?" The investigator nodded. "That's where the mastermind has been hiding all along." Cliffhanger. David realized the final battle would not be fought in a courtroom, but deep inside the abandoned diamond mine that had secretly financed the criminal empire for years. Before sunrise, a convoy of armored vehicles raced across the rocky roads leading to an abandoned diamond mine hidden deep within the African mountains. Years earlier, the government had declared the mine unsafe and officially closed it. Nature had slowly reclaimed the area, covering the entrance with thick vines and overgrown bushes. To ordinary people, it looked forgotten. But it wasn't. According to the intelligence files recovered from Kelvin Holdings, the abandoned mine had secretly become the headquarters of the criminal organization responsible for laundering billions of dollars through illegal mining operations, fake charities, and corrupt businesses across Africa. David sat in the lead vehicle beside Chief Inspector Daniel Mbeki. Spread across the dashboard were maps of underground tunnels, satellite images, and blueprints of the mine. Daniel looked at David. "This won't be easy." David nodded. "I know. The mastermind has dozens of armed guards inside." David remained calm. "Then today it ends." As the convoy stopped a safe distance from the entrance, elite police units quietly surrounded the mountain. Drones rose into the sky, transmitting live footage to the command center. Every exit from the mine was sealed. The operation began. Officers moved carefully through the narrow tunnels, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The deeper they went, the more shocking the evidence became. Hidden vaults overflowed with uncut diamonds. Stacks of cash filled metal containers. Shelves were lined with forged passports, fake company records, and encrypted computers containing years of financial transactions. Daniel stared in disbelief. This organization was far bigger than we imagined. Suddenly, an explosion echoed through the tunnels. Dust rained from the ceiling. "They've activated the collapse charges," an officer shouted through the radio. The criminals were trying to destroy every piece of evidence before the police could seize it. David refused to retreat. "They're running." He pointed toward a tunnel leading deeper into the mountain. "That's where the leader is." Ignoring the danger, David and a small tactical team pursued the fleeing mastermind. After several minutes of running through twisting underground passages, they entered a massive cavern illuminated by powerful industrial lights. Standing in the center was the Scarface leader. Behind him rested several helicopters loaded with crates of diamonds. He slowly applauded. "Congratulations, Mr. Ndlovu." His voice echoed through the cavern. "You've destroyed everything I spent 20 years building." David stepped forward. "You destroyed it yourself the day you chose greed over humanity." The man laughed. "You still believe this world rewards honesty?" He gestured toward the diamonds. "Everything you see here bought politicians, judges, businessmen, even police officers." He smiled confidently. "Money always wins." David calmly replied, "No." The mastermind frowned. "Character wins." At that exact moment, helicopters thundered overhead. The roof of the cavern shook as elite security forces descended through openings in the mountain. Police flooded every entrance. The mastermind realized he was surrounded. Desperate, he pulled out a hidden pistol and aimed it directly at David. Everything happened in seconds. A gunshot echoed through the cavern. Everyone froze. The mastermind dropped to his knees. The weapon slid across the rocky floor. Behind him stood Kelvin. His injured arm was bleeding. "I couldn't let you hurt another innocent person," Kelvin said weakly. The criminal leader looked at him in disbelief. "You betrayed us." Kelvin answered quietly, "No. I finally stopped betraying myself." Within moments, officers arrested the mastermind and his remaining guards. As they were led away in handcuffs, investigators secured truckloads of evidence that would expose one of the largest criminal networks in African history. The nightmare was finally over. Or so everyone believed. As David thanked the officers, his phone rang. The call came from a hospital. His face immediately turned pale. "What?" The voice on the other end spoke urgently. "Mr. Ndlovu, your mother has suddenly stopped breathing." Without another word, David sprinted toward his vehicle. The victory he had fought so hard to achieve suddenly meant nothing. Only one thought filled his mind. He had to reach his mother before it was too late. Cliffhanger. As David's convoy raced toward the hospital, his mother whispered one final request to the nurse. "Bring my son and Amara. I have one last wish before I leave this world." David's convoy raced through the city, with police escorts clearing every intersection. The flashing lights reflected off the windows of nearby buildings as every passing second felt like an eternity. Sitting beside him, Chief Inspector Daniel Mbeki remained silent, knowing that no words could ease the fear in David's heart. When they reached the hospital, David rushed through the entrance without waiting for anyone. Doctors and nurses recognized him immediately and stepped aside as he ran toward the intensive care unit. Outside the room stood Amara. Her eyes were swollen from crying. "The doctors," she whispered. "They're doing everything they can." David nodded without speaking. He slowly entered the room. His mother lay peacefully on the hospital bed, surrounded by medical equipment. The steady beeping of the heart monitor echoed through the quiet room. Though weak, she smiled the moment she saw her son. "You came," she whispered. David knelt beside her and gently held her hand. "I'll always come, Mother." She smiled faintly. "I've watched you become a man your father would be proud of." Tears filled David's eyes. "I couldn't have done it without you." She slowly shook her head. "No. You chose kindness when life gave you reasons to become cruel." The room fell silent. After a long pause, she looked toward the doorway. "Amara?" Amara hesitated before walking inside. She couldn't stop crying. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. David's mother reached for her hand. "My child, everyone makes mistakes." Amara fell to her knees. "I don't deserve forgiveness. You deserve the chance to become a better person." Those simple words broke the wall of guilt Amara had carried for years. "I loved David," she admitted through tears. "I truly did." She looked at David. "But I became blinded by money and status. I thought wealth could replace love." She lowered her head. "Instead, I lost both." David remained quiet. He had forgiven her long ago, but forgiveness did not erase the pain of the past. His mother noticed the silence. "My son." David looked at her. "I have one final wish." "Anything." She smiled gently. "Promise me that your future won't be controlled by yesterday." David squeezed her hand. "I promise." She then turned toward Amara. "And you?" Amara looked up. "Spend the rest of your life helping people instead of chasing riches." Amara nodded through tears. "I promise." Just then, the heart monitor suddenly became unstable. Doctors rushed into the room. "Nurse, increase oxygen. Prepare emergency medication." David stepped back as the medical team worked desperately to stabilize his mother. For several terrifying moments, no one spoke. Then, the steady rhythm returned. The doctor slowly removed his gloves and smiled. "She's stable." Everyone let out a deep breath. The danger had passed. The doctor turned toward David. "Your mother is stronger than we expected." David smiled for the first time that day. Outside the hospital, journalists from across the country waited for updates about the successful operation against the criminal network. When David finally stepped outside, hundreds of cameras pointed toward him. A reporter asked, "Mr. Ndlovu, after everything you've been through, betrayal, success, threats, and tragedy, what have you learned?" David paused before answering. "I learned that money can build houses." He looked toward the hospital window where his mother rested. "But only love makes them homes." The crowd became silent. He continued, "Revenge may satisfy your anger for a moment, but forgiveness sets you free for the rest of your life." His speech spread across television stations and social media within minutes, inspiring millions. Standing nearby, Amara quietly watched him. She finally understood why David had become truly great. It wasn't because he had become a billionaire. It was because success had never changed his heart. As everyone prepared to leave the hospital, David's lawyer hurried toward him carrying an official government envelope. "Sir." David frowned. "What is it?" The lawyer smiled. "The president has personally requested your presence tomorrow." David looked surprised. "Why?" The lawyer handed him the letter. "Because the entire nation wants to honor the man who saved thousands of lives and changed the future of Africa." Cliffhanger. The next morning, during the national award ceremony, David would make a decision that no one, including Amara, would ever expect. The morning of the national award ceremony arrived with an atmosphere unlike anything the country had witnessed in years. Thousands of people gathered in the capital city, while millions more watched the event live on television and social media. Flags waved proudly in the warm African breeze as school children sang the national anthem. Government officials, business leaders, community elders, and ordinary citizens filled the grand auditorium, all waiting to honor the man whose courage had helped dismantle one of the largest criminal networks in the nation's history. When David Ndlovu entered the hall, everyone rose to their feet. The applause lasted for several minutes. The president walked onto the stage and smiled warmly. "Today," he announced, "we celebrate not only a successful entrepreneur but a man who proved that integrity is more valuable than wealth and that true leadership means serving others before yourself." The audience erupted in applause once again. David was invited to the stage, where he received the nation's highest civilian honor. As cameras flashed from every direction, the president handed him a gold medal and a framed certificate of recognition. The master of ceremonies then asked David to deliver his acceptance speech. David stood quietly behind the podium, looking across the sea of faces. In the front row sat his mother, now fully recovered and smiling proudly. Beside her sat Amara, dressed simply, no longer surrounded by luxury or fame. A few seats away was Kelvin, who had accepted responsibility for his crimes, cooperated with investigators, and dedicated himself to rebuilding the lives of the workers affected by his company's collapse. David took a deep breath. "When I left my village years ago," he began, "I believed my life had ended. I had lost my dreams, my future, and the woman I loved." The audience listened in complete silence. "But life taught me something extraordinary." He paused. "The people who reject you do not decide your destiny." Applause echoed throughout the hall. "They only decide whether they will be part of your journey." David continued, "I stand here today not because I wanted revenge." He smiled. "I stand here because I refuse to let pain become my identity." The crowd rose to its feet once more. Then David surprised everyone. "I have one final announcement." The hall became silent. "Today, I am donating 80% of my personal fortune to establish the Ndlovu Foundation for Hope." The giant screen behind him displayed plans for the foundation. It would build free schools, modern hospitals, vocational training centers, clean water systems, and business incubators across rural Africa. Thousands of scholarships would be awarded each year to children from poor families, ensuring that no young person would have to abandon their dreams because of poverty. The audience was overwhelmed. Many people wiped tears from their eyes. David then looked toward Amara. She lowered her head, expecting nothing. Instead, David smiled gently. "Years ago, someone taught me the painful cost of judging people by their wealth." The room became still. That lesson helped shape the man I became. Amara's eyes filled with tears. David continued, "I forgave long ago." He walked down from the stage and stopped in front of her. "I truly hope you forgive yourself." Amara burst into tears. "I don't deserve your kindness." David replied softly, "Kindness isn't earned. It's given." She nodded, understanding at last that forgiveness was the greatest gift anyone could offer. Months later, Amara became one of the foundation's most dedicated volunteers, traveling to remote villages to help educate young girls about making wise choices and believing in themselves rather than chasing wealth alone. Kelvin devoted his remaining years to community service and helping former employees rebuild their livelihoods. David never returned to the life he had once imagined. Instead, he created a future greater than any dream he had as a poor village boy. Back in his hometown, children laughed beneath the old mango tree where David and Amara had once made promises. Nearby stood a modern school, a hospital, and a thriving business center, all built through the Ndlovu Foundation. A bronze statue at the village entrance carried David's favorite words. "Your beginning does not define your ending. Character, courage, and compassion will always take you farther than money ever can." And so the boy who had once left his village with nothing returned as a man who gave everything. His greatest victory was never becoming a billionaire. It was proving that a broken heart can build a better world when it chooses forgiveness over revenge.